In the 4th year of my entanglement with John Lewis, my family went bankrupt. His white moonlight took the opportunity to say, "It's a good opportunity to let her suffer a little and temper her delicate temper." John listened to her and left me on the streets of a foreign country. For months later, I returned to the capital wounded and bruised. Everyone thought that I would continue to pester John, but I took the initiative to avoid him and returned his gift. I completely drew a line between myself and him. John joked with his friends. Finally, I got rid of this dogskin plaster. But on the day I left Beijing, he chased me to the airport in a daze, begging me in a trembling voice, "Isabella, can you stay here and we continue like before?" I smiled and pointed at my slightly bulging belly. "John, how can we still be like before?" 01. When I returned to Beijing with injuries all over my body, John's assistant came to pick me up at the airport. When I arrived, the atmosphere in the box was lively. As soon as I approached, I heard John's voice. "Isabella Davis has improved a lot. She seems to be more obedient. Her delicate personality should have been tempered a long time ago. Amelia is right. Isabella's family is bankrupt now. She is no longer a rich lady. If she continues to be as spoiled as before, who will give in to her? It's just a pity, John. People are going to pester you even more." John laughed sarcastically. "How could I not know? She's just a piece of cake." The moment he finished speaking, he saw me pushing the door open. The crowd who were originally laughing and joking suddenly became quiet. I saw shock, surprise, and disbelief in their eyes. The glamorous and spoiled young lady 4 months ago. Now he looks haggard and thin, like a refugee who has just escaped from hell. Amelia, who was always generous and decent, spoke with concern. "Isabella, what have you done to me? Come in quickly." But I stood there without moving. Amelia wasn't seen sitting next to John like before. His unhappiness was immediately written on his face. Then, with just a few words from Amelia, he was irritated, started crying, and had a big fight with John. A good gathering always ends in a bad mood, so many people don't like me anymore. When I think about this, I just find it ridiculous. "What are you doing standing there? Come in." John frowned at me, the expression on his face showing the disgust and impatience that I was so familiar with. 02. I lowered my eyes and smiled faintly. "John, thank you for asking Assistant Allen to pick me up at the airport." "Isabella, I came here today to return this thing to you." I pulled a small box from my coat pocket and handed it over. It was an ordinary luxury brand necklace. This is also the only birthday gift John has given me in all these years. I like it very much and cherish it very much. I only wear it on my birthday, but now I don't want it anymore. John didn't answer. He just sat there with a cold face and his lips tightly pursed. I hesitated for a moment and put the box on the table beside me. "Isabella, your hand." The girl closest to me let out a small exclamation. John's eyes immediately fell on my hands. The back of his hands was covered with chapped scars, and his originally delicate fingertips were now covered with blisters. It formed a hard scab and became twisted and deformed, looking extremely ugly. I slid my hands back into my sleeves and looked up at John again. "John, I have one last thing to do today." "What's the matter?" His voice was so cold that it made people's heart palpitate. "I've been pestering you for all these years, you must be annoyed." I smiled at him apologetically. "I was ignorant and willful in the past. I apologize to you. Never again, ever." After saying that, I didn't stay any longer and turned to walk out. As I was leaving the room, John called me. "Isabella, you'd better keep your word and stop telling lies that only make you look bad." I paused and didn't look back. Good. 03. I was abroad the night the accident happened at home. My father, who loved me the most, could not be saved. Not long after, my mother liquidated all her assets. He went directly to the United States to join his uncle. All that is left to me is this small apartment. I don't resent her for abandoning me. Instead, I am grateful to her for not leaving me on the streets. The bed is small, but it is better than having 7 or 8 people squeezed into a basement abroad. I don't know how many times better it is. It was the best and most sweet sleep I had in these 4 months. Until the doorbell woke me up. I was a little surprised when I saw John through the cat's eye. But he soon remembered that he also had a house here. I opened the door and before he could speak I said, "Sorry, I'm moving out soon. I'll put this apartment up for sale through an agent." "Isabella, what do you mean?" I don't know if it was my illusion after I said these words. John's expression immediately turned ugly. "I'm moving today, and I promise I won't let you see me again." After I finished speaking, I took my phone and contacted the agent. As soon as the call was connected, John suddenly snatched the phone and threw it to the ground. "You've been playing hard to get for 4 years now, aren't you tired of it? Sell the house and move out? Then live on the streets in the middle of the night and call me crying for help? It was only natural that you moved to my place, wasn't it? Isabella, can you please improve yourself and stop using these tricks?" I looked at the broken phone on the ground and felt heartbroken. During those months, having enough food to eat was a luxury. This mobile phone is a second-hand one that my boss's wife gave to me out of pity when I returned to China. I squatted down and tried to pick up the pieces. John took out his wallet and threw it to me. "Go buy a new one and I'll compensate you. So you don't have an excuse to bother me again." After he said that, he slammed the door and left. I looked at the wallet on the ground, and tears started falling as I laughed. In the end, I bought the cheapest mobile phone. He is right, it is best if neither owes the other anything. I called Assistant Alan and asked him to take John's wallet. "Miss Davis, I'm sorry I can't get away right now. Could you please send the wallet to the company?" I thought about it and said, "Okay. I'll send it over in a moment." 04. Assistant Alan hung up the phone and looked at John, who was standing in front of the French window. Although he didn't quite understand why John gestured for him to say that, but he could vaguely feel it. It seems that Mr. Lewis does not dislike Miss Davis as much as he thinks. "Have you bought the medicine?" "I've bought it. It's all here." Assistant Alan quickly handed over the paper bag. They were all medicines for treating injuries and removing scars, and they were obviously prepared for Miss Davis. John nodded. "You can get out now." About 40 minutes later, the front desk called the secretary's office. Assistant Alan knocked on the door and spoke carefully. "Mr. Lewis, Miss Davis sent it to the same city and it will be delivered soon." Before he could finish his words, the jade paperweight on the desk was suddenly thrown heavily to the floor. Assistant Alan lowered his head and dared not breathe. After a moment, John laughed again. "Okay, she has really grown in ability after not seeing her for a few months." 05. After the house was listed with the agency, I temporarily found a cheap hotel to stay in. John never contacted me again. However, he went out with Amelia in an unusually high-profile manner. From time to time, someone calls me, "Isabella, are you having a fight with John? Is Amelia going to marry John? I heard that they went to look at wedding rings yesterday." I didn't respond to any of them, just when I looked at my slightly bulging belly in the mirror. I called the agent again and lowered the price of the house by 50,000 yuan. I want to leave the capital as soon as possible. Leave here forever and never come back. The baby in the belly is an accident within an accident. By the time I realized it, he was already 3 months old. The doctor said that the fetus has taken shape and is developing very well, with small hands and feet growing. I was lying there and tears suddenly welled up in my eyes. But after thinking for a long time, I decided to remove it. But maybe it was God's will. When I was preparing for surgery, there was a commotion somewhere, explosions were heard in the distance, and then the power was cut off in the entire hospital. The child stayed like this. I comforted myself that at least his father was a very handsome Oriental man. John left me in that turbulent foreign country. It goes without saying what kind of disaster a young and beautiful single woman will bring upon herself. She was sold to the red light district to be the lowest kind of street prostitute, and eventually contracted a disease and died. Or go with a man. When I loudly asked him for help in Chinese, I had already accepted the next step of fate. But when he reached out to me, the trajectory of fate had already completely deviated. The biological father of the baby in my belly. He is that Oriental man who still has a conscience, is handsome and rich to an outrageous degree. Better than John. Isn't this a gift of mercy given to me by fate? 06. The day the house was sold, I received a call from Amelia. "Isabella, I have decided to accept John's proposal. Bless you. I hope you can come on the engagement day, is that okay? Feel sorry. Are you still unable to let go, Isabella?" Amelia seemed to feel sorry for me and said gently, "Some things can't be forced. But now you are smarter than before. You know how to retreat in order to advance. But it's useless, Isabella. John only listens to me, and I'm the only one in his heart. Look, he abandoned you just because of my words. Amelia, what do you want to say?" There was silence on the other end of the phone for a second. "Isabella, I have decided to turn back, so I want to tell you clearly not to bother John anymore." Am I entangled? Don't think I don't know what you're thinking. You love him so much, how could you let him go? Besides, your family is bankrupt. Since he only has you in his heart and only listens to you, what are you afraid of? Amelia didn't say anything for a long time, so I hung up the phone. A few seconds later, I received a voice message. John's voice was weary and disdainful. "Finally got rid of this dogskin plaster. I've never felt so relaxed in my life. Congratulations to Mr. Lewis for regaining your freedom." Haha. I smiled and turned off my phone. 07. The day we left Beijing was a cloudy day with heavy smog. I got out of the taxi carrying my suitcase and walked into the airport lobby. But I heard the loud roar of an engine in the distance. I subconsciously looked back and saw that extremely familiar car. It was rushing towards me. I gripped the handle of the suitcase tightly, turned around and strode forward. "Isabella!" John got out of the car and caught up with me in a few steps. "Isabella!" He held my arm tightly, his voice trembling. "Where are you going?" I looked at him calmly. John let go. There was a red glow in his eyes and he looked distraught. "Isabella, can you stay here and we continue like before?" I loosened my grip on the box. He took a step back and slowly unbuttoned his coat. The wind in Beijing in winter is so cold that my whole body is instantly blown through by the cold wind. My waist is still slim, but my belly is slightly bulging. John's gaze slid down inch by inch and finally, it froze there stiffly. I smiled at him with my eyes curved. "John, how can we still be like before?" 08. The wind that was howling just now seemed to be suddenly paused by someone. John just stood there, not knowing how long. He slowly raised his red eyes and looked at me. "Isabella, why is this happening?" I pulled my coat closer and raised my hand to tidy up my hair that was messed up by the wind. "You're asking me?" I smiled calmly. "Isn't this just what you wanted?" "That's not the case, Isabella. I left you there, but Amelia said she has a relative died trying to escape from him. My ID, cell phone, wallet, everything is lost. I was so hungry that I had to fight beggars for food. I slept under a bridge at night and was almost raped several times. Finally, someone targeted me and wanted to sell me to the red light district. My tears had long dried up in those 4 months. But maybe it was because the wind was too strong and too cold at the moment, and my eyes were stinging. He was the only one who lent me a helping hand at that time. The biological father of the baby in my belly. "Stop talking. Isabella, stop talking." John's face was filled with pain. He stepped forward and grabbed my wrist. "I'll take you to the hospital, Isabella. We can't keep this child of unknown origin." "Why?" He didn't dare look at me and said in a low and hoarse voice, "You take away the child and we will pretend that the things that happened in the past never happened. Isabella, I will treat you well. Your mother went to the United States, and you have no other relatives in the country. You still follow me. I will take care of you from now on." "John." I shook his hand off with force. "Isabella, don't be silly. No one else knows about your pregnancy. I'll arrange for you to have the baby aborted in a private hospital. I'll keep this a secret for you and your reputation won't be affected in any way." "Then what?" I deliberately asked him. "Will you marry me?" 09. John was visibly stunned. He lowered his eyes, his lips tightened, as if he had struggled for a long time before making a decision. "Isabella, your elders will never agree to your family's current situation. But don't worry, I won't ignore you. I will take care of you for the rest of your life." "John." I whispered his name. I even smiled at him gently when he looked up at me. "Do you know what I'm most thankful for right now?" "What is it?" "I'm glad I didn't have any relationship with you. I'm glad the baby in my belly is not yours." "Isabella." The look in John's eyes was one of unconcealable panic. I took 2 steps back. "Don't come to me again. Don't make me regret ever liking someone like you." I pulled the box over and turned to leave. John caught up again. Isabella, where can you go like this? You have never touched a woman's body since you were a child. How will you survive if you leave Beijing and me? I turned around suddenly and let go of the suitcase, spreading his scarred hands in front of John. With these hands, Isabella will never starve to death. 10. John's eyes were blank and his whole body was shaking violently. I've never seen him like this. He is the most playful and unruly one in the circle. No matter where he goes, he is the most arrogant and unruly young man. When I was young and ignorant, I prayed secretly more than once. Pray that John will like me and be nicer to me. Pray that Amelia stays away from John and doesn't come back to mess up our relationship. Pray to marry John. If only he would smile at me one day and be a little nicer. I would forget all the grievances and tears and continue to follow him around. Never tired and never exhausted. Now he can't let me go. He started begging me not to leave. Finally, I was in his eyes. But I just find it ridiculous and feel indescribably disgusted and nauseated. Isabella. John wanted to shake my hand, but when he was about to touch me, he stopped. His hands were those of a pampered young man. My hands used to be like this, but now the knuckles are twisted, scarred, and the blisters have turned into ugly calluses. It's not as pretty, but it's more powerful. The flowers that were originally grown in the greenhouse have left the greenhouse. It's not the only dead end. 11. When I was dragging my suitcase into the airport lobby, I suddenly felt some discomfort in my lower abdomen. Maybe the argument just now caused too much emotional fluctuation. Maybe it's because my body has been wearing out too much these days and I really can't bear it anymore. As a warm current gushed out, the world started spinning in front of my eyes. The whole person suddenly fell limply to the ground. In my last consciousness, there were many voices calling my name. It was a mess. But soon, all the sounds disappeared and the silence became as dead as water. When I opened my eyes again, all I saw was a blinding white. My nose is filled with the smell of disinfectant. The instrument beside me made a ticking sound. I subconsciously wanted to raise my hand to touch my lower abdomen, but she was gently stopped by a soft hand. Don't worry, Miss Davis, the child is fine. Who are you? I stared at the middle-aged woman in front of me. She had an ordinary appearance, but her eyes were kind. The style of his clothes was a bit strange and his Mandarin was poor. I had a vague feeling that I had seen her somewhere, but I couldn't remember where. Mr. Roberts has already known about it and is on a plane to the mainland. The woman tucked the quilt for me and asked softly, "Would you like some water?" I nodded, and my confused mind slowly came to its senses after a while. Mr. Roberts. Could it be him? But, at the beginning, we clearly agreed that we would never see each other again and would have no connection with each other. Yes, I got pregnant, which inadvertently broke the rules. I don't know the identity of this Mr. Roberts, but we can guess it just from the way he wears clothes and his daily expenses. His background and origins are absolutely unfathomable. That day, in the early morning, he asked me a question as he was getting dressed and leaving. Do you want to follow him in the future? Under the circumstances at that time, following him was the best way out. But I refused. I don't want to be a nuisance parasite anymore. He was rejected by me, but he didn't make it difficult for me. Even gave me some money. But I didn't want it. He saved my life and I stayed with him for one night, so it's barely even. I didn't see him again for 3 months. But he suffered a lot in the displacement. Little by little, I learned how to make a living and how to spend money wisely. I also learned to read people's expressions and no longer be arrogant and brainless. Even when I was most tired and in the most difficult times, I cried and regretted. When I was too tired to even get up, I even thought about going back to look for Scott Roberts. But in the end, I gritted my teeth and persevered. If you rely on men for a while, you will be inferior to them all your life. The Davis family went bankrupt, and I was no longer a rich girl. If I go back with all the princess syndrome, I am afraid that I will have to rely on others to survive for the rest of my life. But I don't want to live this kind of life anymore. 12. After my aunt took care of me and helped me drink water and eat something, I fell asleep again in a daze. I didn't sleep well that night and even dreamed about Mr. Roberts. He just sat on the sofa in the living room in a leisurely posture, lighting a cigar with a blowtorch. I was brought in by the servant and stood there for a long while. He just looked up at me and said, Isabella. Mr. Roberts. He had a pair of cold and indifferent eyes. When looking at people, it seems as if there is always a cloud of fog between us that cannot be dissolved. He was clearly very close, yet he seemed as far away as if there were thousands of mountains and rivers between us. In the dream he called my name and then stopped talking. Until the cigar is finished. The back of my clothes was soaked. In the dream my belly was a little big. But my body is still very weak and I can't stand for long. When I was about to collapse he slowly opened his mouth. Who gave you the guts to secretly carry my Scots child? Mr. Roberts, I did not. I've taken all the medicine you prepared. If you don't believe me, you can check the surveillance. I argued hastily, but he seemed totally unconvinced. I just waved my hands lazily, signaling the bodyguard to pull me out. Mr. Roberts, please don't. I cried and begged him loudly, and woke up from my dream crying. When he opened his eyes in a daze, he was still shouting, Mr. Roberts. What nightmare did you have? Like a crying child. In the blurred vision, a handsome man's face was reflected. It's a completely oriental face, but his pupils are amber. His Mandarin is not very standard, but his deep voice is particularly pleasant to hear. He was sitting by my bed, wearing a black custom-made suit with peak lapels. He was holding a handkerchief and helping me wipe away the tears I cried in my dream. The picture is bizarre, yet inexplicably harmonious. I stared at him blankly, forgetting to cry. Mr. Roberts? Teen. It's me. He put the wet handkerchief aside and responded in a gentle voice. I came to my senses and anxiously tried to sit up. Scott raised his hand and held me down. Lie down. I didn't care about anything else and explained quickly. Mr. Roberts, I have taken all the medicine you left for me that day. You can ask the servants in the house or check the surveillance. I don't know why I'm pregnant. When I found out I was pregnant, I went to the hospital immediately. But there was a bomb attack and the entire hospital lost power, so the operation could not be performed. I know for a man of Scott's status, it's best not to tell even a single lie. Now you can ask the hospital to arrange surgery immediately. If you're worried, you can wait until the surgery is over. Isabella. He suddenly spoke. Just like in the dream, he called out my name in a light yet low voice. But in the dream, his tone was filled with weary impatience. But at this moment it was gentle. I believe in Buddhism and I don't kill. Scott said this, his eyes fell on my face again. Those cold and indifferent eyes, along with the gentle tone of voice, also had a faint soft color. Besides, he is my flesh and blood. He leaned forward slightly and brushed my wet hair with his long fingers. Rest well and don't let your mind wander. Mr. Roberts? He removed his fingers, stood up and looked at me. Those eyes seemed to never show any emotion. Unless you really don't want him. 14. On the day I was discharged from the hospital, Scott asked me the same question for the second time. Isabella, will you follow me? But this time I didn't give a quick answer like last time. He was wearing a simple and neat black coat and was followed by bodyguards and assistants. He is obviously a person with gentle features. Even his speech is slow and steady, always calm and composed. But just standing there makes people feel scared. I am no longer the silly and simple-minded Isabella. If you follow him, you can foresee a life of luxury and a worry-free rest of your life. What is more foreseeable is a life like a bird in a cage and a puppet. But when he looked at me like this, those clear and gentle eyes and eyebrows made me have inappropriate thoughts. It seemed that his question always contained some sincerity. He hesitated for a long time before saying the words of refusal. Mr. Roberts, thank you very much. But I'm really sorry I can't go with you. The moment I said this, I felt as if the air around me had become quiet. The people standing in a dense crowd behind him held their breath and lowered their heads. Not even the sound of breathing could be heard. I couldn't help but get nervous, and my palms gradually became wet and sticky. Okay then. Scott's voice shattered the unbearable peace. The expression on his face remained unchanged, and it was still impossible to tell whether he was happy or angry. It's just that I'm sorry for your hard work. I shook my head. No, you don't have to worry about me. Scott nodded slightly. Is the money enough? That's enough. If you have any trouble, remember to come to me. Isabella, these are not just words. I hurriedly said, Mr. Roberts, I will. I won't be stupid. Good. Scott gave me one last look. Then he turned around and got in the car. I watched the car go away until I could no longer see it. Then he gently stroked his lower abdomen and slowly exhaled. 15. The car drove out of the hospital for a long time. Scott, who had been silent all this time, suddenly spoke. Benjamin, do I look scary? Mr. Roberts, there is no one in the world who is more gentle than you. Why do you ask this? She looked like she was afraid of me. Benjamin was stunned for a moment and tried to explain. Miss Davis just doesn't understand you. After all, you have only been together for a short time. Scott seemed not to hear Benjamin's answer. He looked out the car window and twirled the sandalwood beads on his wrist with his long fingers. As if talking to himself, he murmured, Even after having a child, she still refuses to follow me. Benjamin fell silent, not knowing how to respond. That day, Miss Davis cried for help, and he thought Mr. Roberts was just being kind and saving her. Even though he brought the person home, Benjamin didn't think much about it. Mr. Roberts has lived alone for many years. Not to mention that the old lady of the Roberts family was almost going crazy. Even those around them felt sad when they saw it. But unexpectedly, the girl would rather go out and suffer than stay. Benjamin himself also came from a poor background. But those days, watching Miss Davis struggling in the slums, when your hands are blistered from working so hard to earn 3 meals a day, Benjamin couldn't help but be moved. Miss Davis was born in Jeanshio village and probably never washed a dish since she was a child. But he can endure such hardship and fatigue. How can one not be amazed? Perhaps it was precisely because of Miss Davis's tenacity and persistence that Mr. Davis became more concerned about her. He asked people to secretly protect her along the way, and picked the most trusted person to follow her back to the country. Later, news came that Miss Davis had nearly had a miscarriage. The gentleman walked away directly from the negotiating table. Everyone saw the hardships along the way. Even Benjamin thought that the Roberts family would have one more mistress in the future. Unexpectedly, Miss Davis still refused to leave. Benjamin wanted to try to say something to comfort her, but he was too tongue-tied to say it. However, looking at the silent gentleman, Benjamin began to feel uncomfortable. Sir, if all else fails, shall I go and tie up Miss Davis? Scott looked up at Benjamin. Benjamin, no one can touch her. But sir. Benjamin was a little anxious, so anxious that he almost forgot the rules. If she wants to do so, then let her do it. Gentlemen. Stop talking. Scott closed his eyes and Benjamin could only shut up reluctantly. 16. When I was leaving the hospital, I suddenly received a call from Jonathan Clark. There are many people in the circle who don't like me. But Jonathan was pretty nice to me. He is a few years older than me and usually takes care of me. Although John and I had a falling out, but he still addressed Jonathan as before. Brother Jonathan, do you want to talk to me about something? Isabella, would it be convenient for you to come over now? I was silent for a moment. Brother Jonathan, if you have anything to say, just tell me on the phone. John and Amelia had an argument and he hit Amelia. I was a little surprised. After all, Amelia has been like a goddess to John for so many years. Now John wanted to marry her, so why did he suddenly want to do that to her? Amelia cried and threatened to jump off the building, and John couldn't stop her. Brother Jonathan, what can I do there? John forced Amelia to apologize to you in person. I couldn't help but laugh. That's really not necessary. Amelia was wrong to add fuel to the fire, but who was the culprit? What's more, if I hadn't been pestering you for 4 years, it would have been really annoying. How could such a disaster come about? Isabella, John actually has you in his heart. Jonathan, stop talking. Hearing these words now, it's so absurd that it makes me sick. If there's nothing else, I'll hang up now. Isabella. I hung up the phone. I just feel exhausted both physically and mentally. I wanted to leave overnight, but my body couldn't take it anymore. The doctor also said that I need to come to the hospital every week for checkups to protect the fetus. After thinking about it, I decided to book a cheap hotel near the hospital. The hotel had just been booked and Jonathan sent me a WeChat message. Isabella, John is injured seriously. In the photo, John was sitting dejectedly on the sofa, covering his forehead. Blood gushed out from between his fingers, and half of his face was covered in blood. If it were in the past, I would have cried out of pain. I rushed to his side without caring about anything. But now I just replied a message very calmly. Go to the hospital, it's really serious. Isabella, John won't go. I didn't reply. A moment later, a strange number called me. I vaguely guessed who it was, so I didn't answer. After that, the phone went silent. 17. After returning to the hotel, I simply washed up and lay down. The next day, I slept until 9 o'clock before opening my eyes. There are several messages on the phone. It was sent by Amelia at 2 o'clock in the morning. Isabella, are you satisfied? John won't marry me anymore. And it's all because of you. I will personally return this slap to you. I just think this person is seriously ill. If we really have to settle the score, how many slaps will Amelia get? Just block all these numbers. Even Jonathan's was no exception. But when I went to the hospital for another checkup, I met John again. He must have come here specially to wait for me. When we met face to face, I didn't avoid him. I nodded to him and walked towards the elevator. John had a bandage on his head and looked quite disheveled. He didn't say anything, just followed me silently. Register, get checked, and get medicine. I was a little tired, so I sat down on a bench to rest. John looked at me several times, wanting to say something but stopping himself. After a while, he finally called me. Isabella, that man doesn't want you, does he? This is between him and me. John looked at me blankly, as if he had made a great decision. Isabella, come with me. I will help you raise the baby in your belly. 18. I didn't want to waste a single word on him, but when I heard what he said, I was so angry that I laughed. I looked up at him. John, what do you mean? I saw it all that day, Isabella. You were taken into a car by those people and sent to the hospital. I couldn't even get close to you. Brother Jonathan said that Scott has an unfathomable background and is not a good person. You can't afford to offend him. Now it seems that it is just as I thought. He doesn't want you, nor does he want children. But Isabella, we have known each other since childhood, and I can't bear to see you fall to this state. I'll give you a house and transfer it to your name. I'll be responsible for all expenses for you and your child from now on. John, I know you. You wouldn't be so kind for no reason. Tell me, what is your purpose? Isabella, I want you to stay with me. He walked up to me, squatted down, and looked at me at eye level. I want you to still look at me with the same eyes as before, still love me as before, and stay with me forever. Child, if you want to stay, I won't mind as long as you stay with me. I looked at John in front of me. Without his arrogance and conceit, he now looked as pitiful as a child asking for candy. But there was not even a ripple in my heart. John. I lowered my eyes and looked at him. The Isabella who loved you and wanted to follow you forever died in a foreign country 4 months ago. We can start over, Isabella. I swear I will treat you well. But I don't like you anymore. John, I no longer have any joy for you in my heart. You know me best. If someone I don't like, I won't even look at him for a second. The color drained from his face, but he still refused to give up. If you don't like me, who else can you like? The irresponsible man who abandoned you and your child. Isabella, do you know how difficult it will be for a single woman to raise a child whose father is unknown? Is it difficult? I am not afraid of death, so why would I be afraid of hardship and suffering? So you still resent me for abandoning you, right? What do you want in exchange for my forgiveness? He held my hand tightly and refused to let go, becoming increasingly agitated. I don't want to have an argument with him in a place like a hospital. I just casually responded. Then let Amelia suffer all the pain I've suffered. If I can do that, you'll come back, right? I pushed him away, stood up, pulled my coat tighter and walked out. Let's talk later. How could John bear to let Amelia go through the same hell? So, after saying these words, I didn't take it to heart at all. We have known each other for so many years. Every time I get into a fight with Amelia, I've never won. John always favors her. This time it's probably the same. But I will no longer be sad or upset about such things. 19. I received a call from Mr. Roberts in the evening a week later. I was taking a walk in the square outside the community to help digest my food. There was a small fountain there, and a flock of pigeons flew in from somewhere. Scott's deep voice sounded, and the flock of pigeons took off. The sound of pigeon whistles rang out, and the evening clouds were dyed colorful by the afterglow of the sun. I sat down on the bench and felt inexplicably peaceful and quiet. "Miss Davis, I may need your help." "Mr. Roberts, please. I have to go out for a trip next month. There is something I need to take care of personally." Scott still spoke in that unhurried tone. "If I can come back safely, I will keep my promise and not disturb you and the child's lives. But if I can't come back, the baby in your belly will be my only flesh and blood in this world. So, Ms. Davis, are you willing to stay with the Roberts family with your child?" I just felt like someone was holding my heart tightly. At the moment when I was almost unable to breathe, I suddenly asked, "Mr. Roberts, is there something dangerous?" "Don't be afraid, it's just some personal grudges. It won't involve you and the child. Also, I'm just asking for your opinion. If you don't want to, Isabella, I still won't force you." "Mr. Roberts, I have to go to the hospital for another checkup tomorrow." There was silence for 2 short seconds on the other end of the phone. "Good. I'm sorry to bother you. So, Mr. Roberts, I may have to wait until the day after tomorrow to leave. Can you have your people pick me up the day after tomorrow?" I heard a faint intermittent signal sound in my ears. During that sound, Scott's breathing seemed no longer as steady as before. I stroked my slightly bulging belly, but for some reason the corners of my lips curled up slightly. 10 o'clock the day after tomorrow, is that okay? "Can. It's a deal then, Isabella." "Okay, Mr. Roberts, it's settled then." 20. When the call ended, it was 2 o'clock in the morning on his end. The cold wind brought with it a strong smell of blood. It also pulled him back to reality from that rare and precious warmth. Scott put his phone away. The gentle expression on his face during the call just now was long gone. He walked down the stairs slowly and unhurriedly. Walk up to the man who was kneeling there and shaking like a sieve. The man's sight first saw a pair of shiny leather shoes. But the expensive leather shoes were splattered with blood. He was so frightened that he lowered his body even lower, banged his head on the ground, and begged for mercy. Mr. Roberts, please forgive me this time. I won't dare to do it again." The tip of the shoe suddenly lifted up my jaw. The man's face was pale and he raised his eyes tremblingly. Under the cold moon, Scott's eyes were even colder than the moonlight. "I told you that no one who follows me is allowed to touch anything they shouldn't touch. Mr. Roberts. Jason, not only did you touch it, but your people also injured 3 police officers. Mr. Roberts, please. I won't dare to do it again, I swear. I will cut off my arm to swear to you. It's too late. Benjamin, take him to the police station." "Mr. Roberts." The man was shocked. Given his crime, he would die if he was sent to the police station. "Think about your wife and children." The man was quiet instantly. Scott walked out of the yard and someone beside him handed him a warm towel. He wiped his hands carefully, and as he bent over to get into the car, he spoke in a calm tone. "Clean this place up. She's coming the day after tomorrow. Don't scare her." 21. Scott's mansion covers a huge area. There are numerous gardens with various styles and different scenery in each season. It is winter now, but the garden is still full of flowers. The white buildings are arranged in an orderly manner. He took me to the main house located in building number 1. The master suite, which occupies the entire second floor, is still furnished the same way as it was that night. The moment I pushed the door open, my face turned slightly red. Scott took my suitcase and asked the servant to leave. "You take a rest, then go wash up, I'll clean up." "Mr. Roberts, I can do it myself. You're pregnant, it's already hard enough." Scott took my hand and pulled me to sit on the couch. I watched him open his suitcase and start packing his luggage. Outer clothes and some supplies are easy to deal with. But when he started to sort out my underwear, I couldn't sit still anymore. "Mr. Roberts." I stood up, and for once after my pregnancy I felt incredibly flexible. She snatched her underwear from his big hands. Maybe it was because my face was too red, Scott didn't force it. I quickly put my underwear in place. Didn't even notice that Scott's underwear was in that drawer too. When I went to the bathroom to wash up, of course I don't know either. Scott stood in the huge cloakroom for a long time. Then look at the colorful colors in the closet besides black, white, and gray. His eyes gradually filled with smiles. 22. I know very little about Scott. It just seems to me that he must be from a very good family. Then there are decent people who do big business. So at first I didn't take what he said on the phone seriously. Until I heard it from Benjamin by accident. This time he is going to Mexico. The people you have to deal with are the most vicious and evil. Those people did something that should never be done behind Mr. Roberts' back. Now, sir, you have to clean up the mess and withdraw from this situation. I don't know how troublesome and dangerous it will be. But Miss Davis, you are really our husband's lucky star. You are pregnant with our husband's child, which is a great thing. If anything unexpected happens, at least our master still has a bloodline left in the world. Benjamin began to wipe away his tears as he spoke. As I watched him cry, I felt sad too. And before I knew it, I started crying too. Scott happened to come back and saw that Benjamin made me cry, and he got angry, which was rare for him. Stop scolding him. I tugged at Scott's sleeve and looked at him with red eyes. Mr. Roberts, please stay with me and the kids tonight. In the first few days after arriving here, I slept alone in the master bedroom on the second floor. The guest room where Scott stayed. Actually, we only met briefly a few times. Although they had sex and had a child. But to be honest, it's not cooked at all. So when Scott, in his pajamas, held me in his arms, my limbs are still a little stiff. But he just brushed the hair off my forehead and kissed me between the eyebrows, and then he didn't do anything else that would make me uncomfortable. In the dark, I took his hand and placed it on my belly. Mr. Roberts, please touch the baby. His breathing lightened up at that moment. It took a while to return to the previous rhythm. His palms were dry and warm, gently caressing my bulging belly, and I gradually felt sleepy. Isabella. When I was about to fall asleep, Scott suddenly kissed the corner of my lips. I'm sorry, Isabella. I was too sleepy to ask him why he said that. And later, until he left, I forgot to ask the reason. It wasn't until much later, when our children were about to go to elementary school. He told me the truth after he got drunk. There are not so many accidents and coincidences in this world. He is just a caring person who has paved the way step by step for the person he likes. 23. The night before Scott went to Mexico, he still stayed in the master bedroom. I was almost 5 months pregnant at that time. Maybe it's because I'm in a relaxed mood and pay attention to my daily regimen. The body that had suffered severe losses was mostly recovered. She has gained weight on her body and face, and looks a bit like a pregnant woman. In fact, these days I can feel Scott's torment. After all, he is in his prime and in good health. Even when I was pregnant, my figure did not change. On the contrary, the conditioned skin is moisturized and looks great. I was sleepy during pregnancy, but occasionally I could vaguely hear Scott getting up in the middle of the night to flush the bathroom. So that night, he kissed me goodnight as usual. I responded and hugged him again. Nobody knows. I often have a dream. The dream was not about those months of hardship and suffering. Instead, it's often the moment we first meet. I struggled desperately and called for help loudly in Chinese. He was the only Oriental face in the whole audience and was surrounded by countless people. In fact, I didn't have any hope, because a life-saving straw often cannot really save lives. But he stopped and turned to look at me in such a miserable state. Then he said something to the person beside him. Soon, those who were holding me let go out of their hands out of fear. I hugged myself tightly, trying desperately to cover my body under the torn clothes. The heavy men's coat fell on my shoulders and covered my entire body. Then he held out his hand to me. It was a long, strong hand with a string of sandalwood beads on the wrist. At that moment, I thought I had encountered a soft-hearted god. 24. Isabella, don't tease me. Scott grabbed my hand. Why not? Scott chuckled helplessly and kissed my fingertips. You ask even though you already know the answer. It's almost 5 months now, and the doctor said it's okay. I suppressed my shyness and looked him in the eye with courage. Or you don't want to? I'm afraid of hurting you and the baby. His palm fell on my lower abdomen and he sighed. Go to sleep and be obedient. I finally looked away and put my burning face against his chest. Mr. Roberts, the doctor said that as long as it's not severe, it's fine. After I finished speaking, he didn't respond, but he clearly held my arm, and his muscles gradually became as tight as stone. I gritted my teeth and turned over in his arms. I searched online, so It won't press on my stomach. Isabella. Hot kisses fell densely on the back of my neck and shoulders. Scott's voice was hoarse. Who taught you to seduce a man like this? There are so many on the internet. He lowered his head and kissed me tenderly on the ear. Tell me if you feel uncomfortable. Will you stop if I tell you? I don't know where I got the courage from. What I didn't know was that I had such a naughty side in my bones. But after saying this, he curled up like a quail and regretted it. Scott hugged me from behind. A hoarse voice in my ear said, "No, but Isabella, I will be more gentle." Damn it. He probably doesn't know. A long time ago, I unknowingly fell into his tenderness. 25. The second week after Scott left, I went out to relax. I met Amelia unexpectedly, but when she saw me, she suddenly changed her arrogant attitude. She grabbed my hand and begged me to save her and send her back home. Then it dawned on me what John had promised me in the hospital. It wasn't a joke. However, Amelia's relative is quite influential here. Didn't he protect her? Later, Benjamin told me that Amelia's cousin Jason was sentenced to death. Isabella, I beg you. Amelia knelt on the ground, hugged my legs, and begged again. I looked down at her. How can Amelia have an easy life when Jason goes to jail? She was abandoned by John in this foreign country just like me. It's a pity that she didn't have the same good luck as me. To meet Mr. Roberts. Benjamin wanted to chase her away, but I stroked my bulging belly. What I thought in my heart was that Amelia was bad, but her crime did not deserve the death penalty. I made that request to John at the beginning. There is an element of incitement in this. But if we really have to blame someone, John is the one who deserves the most hatred. Just consider it as accumulating blessings for the unborn child and his father. Even though Scott lied to me about something, I still just want him to come back safely. Besides, I didn't want to be a rich young widow. Benjamin, call her family. I glanced at Amelia and she looked quite frightened. He seems to be in a somewhat abnormal mental state. She's really lucky. I smiled and said, not cheap. I waved Benjamin over and whispered something to him. A few days later, Amelia's relatives in China received news of her. 10 million, and their daughter can return home safely. At the same time, the Taylor family also learned that it was John who abandoned Amelia abroad. There was a big quarrel between the Taylor and Lewis families, and John was overwhelmed and unable to cope with it. After Amelia returned, the Taylor family forced John to marry her, using the excuse that Amelia's reputation was damaged. It is said that the two had been extremely unhappy since the wedding, and John hit Amelia again. Taylor's family naturally refused to give up, and a fight broke out between the two sides. After marriage, the two of them lived in dire straits. The white moonlight in my heart, the unattainable goddess. Later, he became the person he hated and despised the most. John drinks all day long and quarrels with Amelia when he comes home drunk. Beating her became a common occurrence. But this is a story for later. It has nothing to do with me. Oh, by the way, I donated all the 10 million to children's charity foundations and welfare homes. 26. When Scott left, he said he would definitely come back before I gave birth. But until a week before delivery, there is still no news from him. The last time I heard from him was 7 days ago. People in the house were gradually becoming panic-stricken. Even I heard several bad comments. I thought about it and called Benjamin over. All the servants in the house were checked one by one. Send away those who are restless and have ulterior motives as far away. Then he closed the door tightly and refused to go out or come in. On the third day before delivery, there was still no news from Scott. Benjamin couldn't sit still any longer and insisted on going to Mexico. I was on the brink of collapse. I was about to give birth, but I was getting thinner and thinner day by day. Benjamin, go ahead. No matter what, whether you live or die, you have to give me a definite answer. But Scott insisted on keeping Benjamin. He was in deep danger, but he was still most worried about me. He left his most trusted subordinates at home. But Miss Davis, Benjamin was in a dilemma. Otherwise, I'll send you back home first. It's not safe here anymore. Naturally, Scott is the most important in his heart. But I was pregnant with Scott's child. What's more, there has been no news from Scott for a long time. His enemies are all waiting for an opportunity to strike. The day before yesterday, Benjamin and his men caught several strangers with guns hidden outside the house. Benjamin, I'm not going back home. My child and I will be waiting for him here. Ms. Davis. You go ahead, I can do it alone. I smiled at him just like I did to John that day. He also held out his hand to Benjamin. Look, Isabella can't be defeated. She can endure any hardship and is not afraid of it. Benjamin looked at my hand, which had been healed for a long time but still hadn't recovered. Tears rolled down my cheeks. I'm not leaving. I'll listen to you, sir. I want to protect you and your children. I wanted to persuade him to leave and go find Scott. Maybe what is missing now is his strength. It can save Scott from danger. But before he could open his mouth, he suddenly felt a sharp pain in his stomach. The severe contractions made it impossible for me to utter a word. When I was about to pass out from the pain, there was only one last thought in my mind. I couldn't hold out long enough for Scott to come back and be with me during the birth of my baby. When he left, he asked me if I was scared. I said I'm not afraid of anything. But in fact, I am really afraid. I am afraid of pain, suffering, being beaten, scolded, hungry, and cold. I am also afraid of having to undergo surgery during childbirth. So Scott, it would be nice if you were here. How nice it would be if you were here. 27. Benjamin and the servants took me to the hospital. I was just pushed into the delivery room and the nurse didn't have time to close the door. A strong hand suddenly pushed the door open. Isabella. I lay unconscious on the delivery bed. I could vaguely hear Scott's voice. I tried hard to open my eyes to confirm that it was him who came back. But I didn't have any strength at all. But my hand was held tightly by a warm and broad hand. I am very familiar with that temperature and strength. I felt at ease instantly. Isabella. Scott leaned down and kissed me gently. I'm home, Isabella. The production process went smoothly. The doctor said that my physical indicators were very good and fully met the indicators for a natural birth. And if you give birth naturally, the pain will go away soon after the birth. No need to endure the pain for several days after a cesarean section. But Scott was clearly frightened. Although he was asked to leave in the middle of the delivery because he was too nervous and affected the doctor's work. And when I was crying in the delivery room, Scott was standing outside the door and crying too. Benjamin was shocked when he saw it. Scott sternly ordered him not to spread the news. But Benjamin told me secretly as soon as I left the delivery room. I couldn't help laughing when I thought about that scene, but as I laughed, I started crying again. No matter how hard it is, I am willing to endure it. But who doesn't want to be loved and held in someone's hands? Scott scheduled surgery shortly after I gave birth. The old lady of the Roberts family was still somewhat reluctant. But the old man had old ideas. Looking at his great-grandson in his arms, he felt satisfied again and did not try to persuade him anymore. Scott came back this time with injuries. He lost contact during that period because his injuries were too severe. I didn't say anything just when the baby was 3 months old. After I recovered fully, I asked Scott to accompany me to a temple. He doesn't believe in Buddhism, but I do. I only pray that the Buddha will bless him because of my sincerity. When I knelt down in front of the Buddha, Scott suddenly said to me, Isabella, you don't know how many sins I have committed. He had deliberately replaced the medicine, and the power outage in the hospital caused by the explosion was his instruction. Later, he tricked her into leaving China and coming to him. He doesn't believe in Buddhism. He was not afraid of being blamed by the Bodhisattva. He was just afraid that she would be afraid of him and distance herself from him. He was just afraid that his greed for her would not be forgiven. I looked at him and handed him the incense. You don't know how spiritual and compassionate the Bodhisattvas here are. Scott held the incense and watched me kneel down devoutly. He finally followed my example and knelt down beside me. I looked up at the Bodhisattva devoutly. Scott kept looking sideways at me. A long time ago we didn't know. That one glance at that time determined this life. End of full text.